more with the money part, which may interest you more than other parts. I actually don't teach this part. We have a whole course on project finance. I know enough about it that I can inform you, but not enough that I probably confident in answering all the questions. But it's a very important part of the model, and it's something that a lot of people don't understand particularly well. I start out with this diagram because this would show you what your financial model would generate. And you can see that it's a kind of a messy situation. There's bumps and some slopes change, but this would be your use of funds during operations, not during construction here. And they're cumulative. So, and you can see that things kind of bump up at times. You know, fixing a building is not one where every year you spend equal amounts. In a certain year, you've got to replace HVAC, or you've got to replace a cooler, or a boiler, or you've got to change a roof membrane. And this shows you so here we have, in light blue, we've got the operating and maintenance costs. We've got a reserve account deposit here. And that reserve account is there to fix the building and keep it up to scratch. We've got project debt and principal. We've got income tax to pay. We've got project debt interest to pay. We've got equity returns, index bond service, and then we've got our loan repayment. Now, I'm not going to go into all of it, but I'm just saying that as you look, it gives you a kind of pictorial of how complex this financial model is. And so when you're designing this on Excel, you can imagine how complex. And you just make one mistake and it's cumulative. And so usually what happens, you have a consultant that will actually design the financial model for you. And then you have another consultant that will check it over for mistakes, who will actually run it and find out, because it's too important a matter to sort of live without one mistake. So I'll move on from there. So essentially what happens is you've got your development period, your construction period, and then you've got your operating period. And what you find is that the risk is highest here in your development period. Your risk diminishes during your construction period, and then it begins to almost level out here, where the risk should now have been managed and mitigated such that it's now stable. So you can see that if someone's going to buy this project, they're going to look at buying it somewhere out here. So if a pension fund is going to buy a piece of infrastructure, this is what they want. They want a stable, essentially, you know, risk-free to some extent asset. So these are the typical equity returns that we look at for infrastructure. So equity that goes in at this stage, people are looking at in the 12 to 14% range. It's not high, but that's a typical range. This is from industry work. So that's what they're going in at. They're looking at 12 to 14% up through that bidding. Once they become a preferred bidder and through financial close, some of that risk diminishes. And so now they're looking at the lower risk, and in some cases they may sell some of that equity. They may have factored it in at a 14% return, and they can now sell it at 12, and so they can pocket 2%. So there are firms that will go in and put some equity in early and try and get it out as early as possible. Then as you go into the operation, construction's completed, through first year of operation, you're looking at about a 9 to 11% equity return. And then when you're in the when you're in that stabilized operation, you're looking at anything from 8 to 10% return. And why we say a portfolio sale, that might be one of the big pension funds coming in and buying it. And that's a pretty good deal. But they'll buy it direct because they're cash rich, and so they can step in and take over. So it's not unlike real estate, and that is that as you reduce the certainty or uncertainty, then your return begins to diminish.
Our students probably want to ask you this, but they're too polite. Every time someone says returns, we always say, "Oh, is that internal rate of return, or is that an annual cash return?"
That's a very interesting question. In fact, it's even more complex because one of the issues, they use ROI.
Return on investment.
Yeah, but here's the dilemma. Do we start from substantial completion, or do we start from start of construction? The industry can't agree.
When did you start? Your money started? Your money went in?
Well, it's one of the debates they have because it makes a big difference on your calculation.
And this model breaks off that the construction period because it's an operating cash flow issue.
Yeah.
So they want to separate it.
Yeah. You see, I mean, because if you remember my diagram where you spent all this money up front and then it was kind of constant. So many people would argue, well, it starts at substantial completion where the money flows in. Others will say, but just a minute, you just spent a lot of money building it and there's equity in there. So there's not, I don't know where people land on this, but it's a big issue as to when the return on investment clock starts ticking. It has a huge impact on that number.
Okay.
So this would be, now your question was, is it essentially,
Are they time-weighted returns or annual returns? So, do they want to get 8 to 10.5%
annually?
annual return, or is that like over?
No,
time-weighted?
it would be,
Annual return.
it's annual return, yeah.
Cash annual return, annual cash return.
Yeah. But you can see this dilemma of when the clock starts ticking. Oh, sorry, was there another? Yeah.
So, looking at 10 or 11%.
Yeah.
In a lot of these cases, we get essentially an RFR credit, like basically a lifetime credit for RFR. So it's got to be 7 to 800 basis points on cash annually. So we start with that's a huge credit.
Yeah, but I think again,
Leverage or leverage term, that's a big on the energy project. It's essentially just credit. Big bucket. Yeah. Well, no, this is.
no, it's just equity.
This is not leverage, this is That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, just on the equity.
That's what, that kind of.
Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but these aren't domestic grade utilities, so there's probably a risk premium in there.
No, not necessarily, depends on the payment.
Yeah, but they're almost a guaranteed payment. It's the government that's writing you the check. Now, if you were looking at a revenue model, it would be different. Okay, so the word project finance is not new. It's used to build mines. It's used to build all kinds of projects, not just public. And there are specialists in this field. It's very similar to structured finance in some ways. For some strange reason, it's not taught in business schools. They're very seldom taught. But it's a huge business. And so I mentioned going back to power plants and cogeneration, etc. So it's nothing new. but it is the fundamental basis of PPPs. And so you're raising funds on limited or non-recourse financing. And it's a legally and economically separate investment of which the lenders are only looking primarily at the cash flow of the project as a source of funds to service debt and provide a return. So there's no underlying value to the land, there's no underlying value to the asset. I mean, who wants a power plant that defaults in the middle of some country in the world? Might be a liability at that stage. So traditionally, all of this it's used in, as I say, it's used in the mining industry, it's used in the petroleum industry, resource extraction, etc. So it's largely driven in the last 20 years by the deregulation of utilities and the privatization of public sector capital investments, both in the developed and developing world. So it really is driven by the government beginning to step back from things that it traditionally had undertaken, such as airports, water systems, sewage treatment, etc. And so I mentioned early on in the course that this is all kind of tied to what we call the new public management. It's also promoted by the internationalization of investment in major projects. Big investors today feel comfortable they'll go wherever. I mean, as I said, I talked to the head of Canada Pension Plan Board, and I said, do you believe in asset allocation? He said, no. I said, what's your time horizon? He said, 99 years. I said, where would you go? He said, wherever it's politically acceptable to use the word PPP, or some derivative of that. So at that time, they were saying New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Chile, and Canada were the countries, and I don't know if they've ever acquired anything in the US right now, but they're very sensitive, these big funds, to any kind of political pushback on this. So there are a lot of countries that they feel, and now Indonesia, India, it's an outflow of funds, not an inflow. People are pulling back. There was a big fund to go into India, and they're pulling back. So the features of project finance is you have to have this ring-fenced SPV, whose only business is the business of this project. It's raised on a project rather than an established business, although you can refinance, and very high ratio of debt to equity. The debt may go up as high as 90% when you first raise your capital. So there's no guarantees, no personal guarantees. Lenders rely on future cash flow. The main security is the project company's contracts. So the main security for your finance is really the master agreement. And that's why the master agreement has to be signed before you can get a commitment on financial close. And the project has to have a finite life. You can't enter into a contract in perpetuity. So, we keep coming back to this. And so here it is. It's the same contract. The boxes shift a little bit, but we've got the investors putting in equity, and we've got the lenders putting in debt structure. So one of the issues is, how does it differ from corporate finance? I'm not going to discuss real estate finance, because again, real estate finance is recourse-based, usually personal guarantees. I don't know about your banks, but our banks require personal guarantees or cross-collateralization. You can't get a real estate loan in Canada, I don't care how big you are, without some sort of guarantee. But there is no such in this. So if we look at corporate finance, then finance, any finance, any capital structure requires equity, and it requires some sort of debt to make it work. So this just gives you an idea, because again, you've got to kind of understand the differences in corporate and I don't know, are people here familiar with corporate debt, what we mean by that? Because some big developers actually do operate on corporate debt, right? I mean, I'm sure Brookfield would operate on corporate debt, where they can finance.
He said, we had the guy from Brookfield here this week.
Yeah,
He said they don't. They have project asset.
Do they?
Finance.
okay,
So they don't put general bonds out.
okay,
There are some.
Brookfield is one example. It does. The big REITs, all use lines of credit and bonds.
Yeah.
The Brookfield's one exception.
okay. Yeah, no, and I mean, it's a company decision that they're gonna make. And so in a corporate finance, and I don't want to, because of our time, I'm not going to go into this, other than to say that you have to sort of understand the difference between corporate finance and project finance, to sort of understand the nuances. And it's different from privatization, because again, privatization means that you convey the ownership to a private company. And you know, so when they sell the Skyway Bridge in Chicago to Macquarie, okay, that's really just privatization of the bridge. It's an existing asset, etc. And they probably would raise the debt corporately under their structure. And so it comes into the picture when a private firm requires financing to construct a public infrastructure, on the basis of a contractor license. So you have to have a concession agreement or a license of some notion then to build your model of project finance. To be fair, in all finance, you never have clear boundaries. So there may be areas where it's similar to situations where you do raise high debt. And it's even more blurred when a project is completed and refinanced. And so what we find, you know, I go to banks and I say, where's your project finance group? And they say, oh, it's in our structured finance. Why is it there? Well, that was sort of close. So what you find often is that distinguishing the two of, say, project finance versus structured finance is really more a matter of convenience than theory. And a lot of it depends on the skills of the lending officer. For example, the sort of guru of corporate project finance in Canada is this Duncan McCallum, who runs a very small shop in RBC, but he's very skilled as an individual. And people in the industry refer to him as the sort of grandfather of this type of financing. So your due diligence is very different that you're undertaking, because the risk assignment is very different. You can imagine just, you know, how do you do